In this video, we're going to recap on the relationship between liberalism and democracy. Typical style questions on this topic would be, to what extent is liberalism compatible with democracy, or a fear of democracy runs throughout liberalism, or is liberal democracy a contradiction in terms? For any of those questions, a good idea would be to start off with some kind of definition for both the terms. Liberalism is an outlook or ideology that prioritizes the individual or the rights of the individual over any social or collective group, whereas democracy is a system in which power resides with the people collectively. It is majoritarian and it's based on the will of the majority. So how can these two different outlooks be reconciled? The main arguments you would make to say that liberalism is not compatible with democracy. The first one would be that democracy, based on the will of the majority, is collectivist, and therefore the individual is threatened by the tyranny of the majority, which is a phrase we came across in Unit 1, looking at direct democracy. Not only would the individual be threatened by the tyranny of the majority, but this emphasis on the majority could lead to what Mill called a dull conformity, which would threaten the vigour and vibrancy of society. A second argument, where liberalism could not be seen to be compatible with democracy, is that political democracy puts power in the hands of the uneducated and illiberal masses, the rabble or the swinish multitude, as Burke described them, while those, the minority with education and experience, were sidelined. And following on from that second point, there was the third point, that those self-same uneducated masses will be susceptible to vote for their narrow class interests. They will be susceptible to electoral bribery with the promise of more benefits which could be paid for by more taxation, more state intervention, which, if you're a liberal, would mean an infringement on property rights. So there would be the three main arguments you would make to argue that liberalism is not compatible with democracy. However, you can also make the case that liberalism is compatible with democracy, or liberalism became reconciled to democracy because, firstly, democracy can be seen as protective because it's based on consent, which can be withdrawn. And this is a particularly important point for classical liberals, for example, over the issue of taxation. If taxation becomes too oppressive or too high, then individuals can withdraw their consent for the government and therefore protect themselves and their property. A second reason why liberalism is compatible with democracy is that democracy helps achieve equilibrium or a balance in society. It helps achieve a consensus among competing groups in a society that's increasingly complex and with a number of competing groups. And the final reason why liberalism is compatible with democracy is that it's developmental. It helps promote education and participation and contributes to self-development, a point that's particularly important for modern or social liberals. Certain kinds of democracy are also seen as being particularly beneficial. For example, representative democracy, through the mediation of educated and experienced representatives who can mediate the demands of the masses and also protect minorities, and also pluralist democracy or political pluralism, which disperses power and also helps to limit the power of government. So in summary, to the broad question, is liberalism compatible with democracy? The answer would be no, because democracy is inherently collectivist. Individuals would be subject to the tyranny of the majority. The will of the majority can lead to a dull conformism, which threatens the vigour and vibrance of society, and demands from citizens will inevitably lead to more state intervention, leading to high levels of taxation and infringing on individual property rights and freedoms. And democracy can also lead to rule by the uneducated and illiberal masses, with experience and education sidelined. However, liberalism is compatible with democracy, and democracy can be seen as beneficial as it is developmental, encourages education and participation. It is protective, it is based on consent, and some evidence of that will be property rights have never really been substantially threatened by democratic governments, more often than not by tyrannical governments. And democracy also promotes equilibrium, helps achieve consensus in a society between competing groups. And despite the dangers governments pose, they can be constrained by constitutionalism, which we will look at in a different video. And also certain kinds of democracy are very beneficial, representative democracy and also pluralist democracy, which helps disperse power and limit the power of government.